The very first thing my brother said to me that evening wasn't "thank you for coming" or "I'm glad you're here," and it certainly wasn't "I've missed you." No. As I stood beneath a canopy of warm string lights stretched across the vineyard patio, my heels clicking softly on the old stone path, Ryan leaned in just close enough for two nearby guests to hear and said, "Sam, try not to make this about you." His voice carried that smooth, public politeness that photographs well, but underneath it was the same subtle sting he's been perfecting since we were kids, the kind that slips beneath the skin and settles there, daring you to pull it out. He didn't bother to lower his tone either. In fact, I'm convinced he wanted it overheard, because the couple standing near the wine barrels glanced up at me for the briefest second before politely looking away, as if they'd stumbled into a moment they didn't want to be caught witnessing. I stood there, smiling just enough to keep the peace, but inside my chest something tightened the way a rope pulls taut before it holds weight. My uniform wasn't on me tonight. It was neatly folded in my hotel room garment bag. But that didn't make me any less of a soldier, and it certainly didn't mean I'd forgotten how to keep my posture when someone was looking for a reaction. I had promised my mother there would be no scenes, no comebacks, no turning my brother's wedding into what she once called another one of your military moments. And yet, in less than a minute of seeing me, Ryan had already tested the limits of that promise. If you've ever had someone manage to dismiss years of your hard work and sacrifice in a single, casually delivered sentence, you know the burn it leaves, slow, deliberate, and meant to smolder. And if you want to hear exactly how I turned that moment around without raising my voice or making a spectacle, subscribe now and tap the like button, because trust me, this story doesn't just turn, it flips. The ceremony began just as the last traces of daylight softened into a golden haze over the rows of vines. The smell of lilacs drifted in from the trellis, and Lauren, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, appeared at the top of the aisle looking like she'd been painted into the scene. Ryan's expression softened instantly, something I don't think many people in our family have seen, and the vows began. I clapped, I smiled for the photographer, and I hugged the right people at the right times, all while Ryan's words replayed in my mind in an endless loop, each repetition adding another layer to the sting. After the vows, I moved toward the cocktail area. I ordered a club soda. Not because there weren't stronger options available, but because habit is hard to break, and I've learned that keeping a clear head in unpredictable environments is never a bad choice. My uniform might have been tucked away, but my training wasn't. I scanned the space automatically, noting the two main exits, the easiest path to the parking lot, and the fact that one of the caterers had set the dessert trays a little too close to a swinging door. That's when Tyler, one of the groomsmen, wandered over with the air of someone who believed his own small talk was a gift to any conversation. "So, you're still in the army?" he asked, his tone almost identical to the way someone might ask if you still drove the same old car. "Yes," I said, keeping it short. "My cousin did 2 weeks before blowing out his knee," he went on. "The basics harder now." He smiled like he'd just shared a fact that would fascinate me. I gave him the polite, professional smile that says, "I've had this conversation before, and you're not the first to think it's interesting." Then I excused myself before the exchange could drift into a series of predictable follow-ups about whether I'd seen any action or met anyone famous. If you've ever had to stand through one of those shallow conversations where you're expected to politely validate someone's flimsy connection to your real work, hit subscribe. You're going to feel right at home here. Back at the family table, Mom was adjusting the clasp on her clutch, Dad was laughing at something the best man had said, and Ryan, still flushed from the ceremony, was making his way through a short list of thank yous. His delivery was warm, charming even, until he suddenly dropped in, and even my little sister made it here without having to rappel in. There it was again. Another gentle jab dressed up as humor. The kind of comment that's harmless on the surface but still lands like a pebble in your shoe. It doesn't stop you from walking, but it reminds you with every step that it's there. A polite ripple of laughter moved through the guests. I didn't flinch. The Army teaches you that reactions are choices, and sometimes the best move is not to give the other person the satisfaction of seeing the hit land. If you're the kind of person who knows the power of holding your ground in silence until the right moment comes along, hit that like button now, Those are exactly the moments this channel lives for. The best man took over the microphone and, apparently deciding Ryan's joke was worth doubling down on, recycled my old nickname, G.I. Jane. He delivered it with a grin that said he expected the room to laugh, and of course they did. I was considering stepping outside for some air when my phone buzzed in a way that immediately shifted my focus. 3 short vibrations, the alert I'd set for one very specific contact. I glanced down, careful to keep the screen angled away from curious eyes. COL Mercer. Confirm you're on secure line. Just like that, the noise of the reception faded in my mind. I slipped away toward the side garden, where the hum of conversation was replaced by the chirp of crickets and the faint rustle of the vines. The moonlight painted silver lines across the path as I answered quietly, Captain Brooks on. Status. Mercer's voice was clipped, efficient, even over the encrypted channel. Family event, off duty. No restrictions until Monday 0700. I replied. Copy. Stand by for potential consultation. And with that, the call ended. I stayed there for a moment, grounding myself in the scent of the lilacs and the glow of the garden lights, before turning back toward the reception. 2 lives, I thought, the one where I'm a sister at a wedding and the one where I'm a soldier who might be needed anywhere in the world at a moment's notice. They overlap more than people realize. Ryan intercepted me before I could reach the table. Please tell me you're not about to turn this into some kind of army recruitment story, he said, his tone light but his eyes searching. No, I said evenly. Not unless surviving your speeches counts. He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. Sometimes, you don't have to say much for people to sense the shift. And when they feel it without you spelling it out, that's when the balance quietly tips. If you've ever experienced that unspoken shift where you suddenly know the upper hand is yours, drop a comment and subscribe. Those moments are worth dissecting. The rest of the evening unfolded in a mix of tradition and noise. First dances, champagne toasts, the clink of silverware against plates. Across the patio, I caught Lauren's grandmother watching me, her gaze steady, not judgmental, curious, almost as if she sensed I was holding something back. Then came the sound that pulled me out of the conversation I was half listening to, the slow, deliberate crunch of tires on gravel. I turned slightly, just enough to see a black SUV glide to a stop at the front entrance. Tinted windows, engine idling, government plates catching the light. The driver stepped out, a tall man in a perfectly pressed dark suit, an earpiece coiled neatly behind his ear. He scanned the area once, then his eyes found mine. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't move toward him. Not yet. He stayed by the vehicle, posture straight, waiting with the kind of patience that tells you he's used to operating on someone else's clock. To anyone paying attention, it would have been obvious he wasn't here for just anyone. Tyler, of course, noticed. Sam? You expecting someone? He asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Something like that, I replied, keeping my tone as even as my heartbeat. I didn't elaborate, and I didn't need to. If you want to know exactly what that SUV was about and how it changed the tone of the evening entirely, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next part. Ryan had seen it too. For once, there was no smirk, no joke ready to fire. His eyes moved from me to the SUV and back again. His grip on his whiskey glass tightened just enough for me to notice. And that's where I'll leave you for now. Because the moment before the reveal is often more powerful than the reveal itself. It's the breath before the drop, the silence before the applause. And in that silence, every single dynamic in the room had shifted, even if most people didn't realize it yet. So do yourself a favor, subscribe, like, and hit the bell, because what happened next is something you're going to want to hear in full. The SUV's engine idled with the low, steady hum of a machine that wasn't in any hurry, like it knew the attention it commanded would come whether it roared or whispered. Even with the reception music playing, something light and upbeat that the DJ probably thought would keep people glued to the dance floor, I could feel the vehicle's presence pressing at the edges of the room. It was the kind of arrival that creates a ripple in the air before anyone even looks outside to see what caused it. I stood still, my drink in one hand, my other resting lightly against the back of an empty chair, and watched as the driver remained in place, feet apart, posture straight, hands loosely clasped in front of him. His gaze was steady, scanning once more, but never lingering on anyone but me. Ryan, who had been mid-laugh with his best man, caught the line of sight and turned to see where it landed. Our eyes met across the space, his holding a flicker of something I hadn't seen from him all day. Not mockery, not smugness, but an edge of uncertainty. If you've ever been in a room where everyone else is still caught up in the music and the chatter, but you can already feel the air shifting because something outside the frame is about to demand all the attention, subscribe right now. You'll want to be here for how these moments play out. Tyler, predictably, was the first one to break the thin veil of curiosity. Seriously, Sam, are you expecting someone? Because that guy looks like the Secret Service. His voice wasn't exactly subtle, and a couple of guests nearby tilted their heads just enough to follow his line of sight toward the open French doors. I kept my tone even, my expression unreadable. Something like that, I said again, letting the words hang there without offering him the satisfaction of more. Ryan's smirk was gone now, replaced with a thin, straight line of lips pressed together. He glanced toward Lauren, who was on the other side of the room chatting with her grandmother, and then back at me. There was a question in his eyes, but he didn't ask it.
Not yet.
The driver took a single step toward the entrance, his shoes clicking sharply against the stone. He didn't wave, didn't call out, didn't move any faster than he needed to. Every motion was measured, the way you move when you know people will make space without you asking. Inside, the energy had started to shift. The laughter near the bar softened. Conversation stuttered as eyes drifted toward the man in the suit. The DJ kept the music going, but even he was glancing over his laptop toward the doorway. Mom noticed the subtle hush before she noticed the SUV. She touched Dad's arm lightly, murmuring something I couldn't catch, her eyes narrowing as she followed the collective gaze. Dad's expression changed from mild curiosity to recognition, though whether it was recognition of the man himself or just the type of presence he represented, I couldn't be sure. If you've ever seen a room go from casual comfort to poised alertness in the space of a breath, tap that like button now. Those seconds are where the real stories live. The driver stopped at the threshold. Captain Brooks? He called, his voice firm but carrying no strain, the kind of tone designed to reach the intended ears without alarming anyone else. A ripple moved through the guests, as if the name itself carried weight. Those who knew me well, family, a few close friends, sat up straighter. Those who didn't begin to glance around, matching the name to the person. Yes, I answered, my voice steady, though I knew this was the moment where every pair of eyes that hadn't been on me before would find me now. The driver inclined his head slightly. We're ready for you. No elaboration, no urgency in the words, but the certainty in his tone said this wasn't optional. Ryan took a half step forward, as if to insert himself into the exchange, then stopped. His jaw tightened, and he tried to cover it with a sip of whiskey. I set my glass down slowly, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the door. The driver stepped aside, gesturing toward the SUV with one gloved hand. Behind me, the conversations had gone fully quiet. Even the music felt like it had lowered itself, as if the moment was too large to compete with. If you've ever had the strange satisfaction of watching someone who underestimated you finally realize they've been playing the wrong game entirely, make sure you're subscribed, because that's exactly where this is headed. As I stepped into the night air, the scent of lilacs and cooling stone wrapped around me. The driver opened the rear door of the SUV, but didn't motion for me to enter just yet. Inside, I caught a glimpse of the glow from a small secure tablet mounted to the back of the front seat, the kind used for encrypted communications. We've been instructed to remain on standby, the driver said quietly, pitched so only I could hear. Colonel Mercer will brief you when we get confirmation. I nodded once. Understood. He closed the door again but stayed by my side. His presence was a wall between me and the guests who had begun drifting toward the entrance, curiosity pulling them closer. Tyler had joined them, of course, leaning just far enough out the door to get a better look. Wow, Sam, this is different. Are you in trouble or something? Ryan's voice cut through before I could answer. Tyler, maybe let her handle her business. The words weren't sharp, but there was something protective in them, a tone I hadn't heard from him in years. If you've ever had a long-time skeptic suddenly step in on your behalf, hit like right now, because that's when the lines between critic and ally start to blur. I didn't respond to Tyler, didn't respond to Ryan either. Instead, I stepped a little further into the cool night, letting the chatter behind me fade. The stars were bright above the vineyard, the kind of clear you only get far from city lights. For a moment, I just breathed, centering myself. The driver's radio crackled softly. Standby lifted. Clearance confirmed. Proceed with assets. Copy, the driver said, before turning to me. Ma'am, we'll brief you in the vehicle. The estimated time is short, but you'll be returned before the conclusion of the event. It was a promise, though not one I could take to the bank. But I knew my parameters, and I knew Mercer wouldn't pull me unless it mattered. I gave a short nod. Let's move. As I reached for the door, I glanced back through the open entrance to the reception. Ryan was still watching me, glass in hand, expression unreadable. Mom had stepped closer to him, speaking low, her brow creased. Lauren, in her perfect white gown, stood beside her grandmother, both of them looking toward me with quiet, searching eyes. If you want to see exactly what happened when I came back inside, and how every single person in that room looked at me differently, subscribe now so you don't miss Section 3. The driver held the door for me, and as I slid into the back seat, the interior lights revealed a neat stack of folders beside the tablet, each marked with classification bands. The SUV eased forward, pulling away from the soft spill of wedding lights and into the shadowed road that wound between the vineyard rows. For the next few minutes, the only sounds were the muted hum of the engine and the occasional burst of encrypted chatter from the radio. The driver didn't speak unless necessary, and I didn't ask questions before I had the full picture. That's one thing service teaches you. You can't act on fragments. By the time we looped back toward the main road, Mercer's voice filled the cabin through the tablet speaker. Captain Brooks, you're being consulted on an urgent matter involving an asset in transit. Your role will be advisory. You will not be required to leave the immediate area unless escalation occurs. I listened, asked the right questions, and kept my answers short. Mercer was precise, and when he was finished, he said, "You'll be returned within the hour. I suggest maintaining a low profile when you re-enter the event. That is, unless you want them to wonder." There was a faint smile in his voice, and I didn't need to see him to know he'd guessed exactly how this was going to play out. If you've ever had the choice between clearing up a mystery for someone or letting them sit with it until it changes the way they see you, tap that like button, because sometimes the silence tells the story better than you ever could. The SUV turned back into the Vineyard Drive. The lights of the reception came back into view, golden and warm against the dark, the sound of music floating faintly through the night. The driver pulled to a smooth stop at the entrance, stepped out, and opened my door. As I stepped back inside, every conversation seemed to pause for just half a beat. The band played on, the clink of glasses resumed, but the glances, those lingered. Ryan's gaze found me instantly. And that's where we'll pick up next, because the moment I crossed that threshold, the night changed in a way no one there would forget. So if you're ready for the shift you've been waiting for, subscribe, like, and hit the bell. Section 3 is where the tables finally turn. When I stepped back into the reception hall, the warmth of the golden lights and the hum of conversation wrapped around me, but it was impossible to miss the subtle shift that had taken place since I'd walked out. People weren't just glancing anymore. They were watching. Not the overt, gawking kind of watching, but the kind where their eyes linger a second too long before they remember to look away, as if they're trying to fit a new piece into the puzzle they thought they'd already solved. The band kept playing, a steady rhythm under the murmur of voices, but I could feel the questions hanging in the air like the faint scent of wine after a glass is set down. Ryan was still near the bar, his glass in hand, his posture relaxed in appearance only. I've seen men in combat keep a looser stance under heavier pressure, and yet there he was, every muscle quietly braced. I crossed the floor with deliberate calm, each step unhurried, every move precise. Years in uniform will teach you that pace is as much a message as words are. My eyes skimmed the crowd, catching the quick shifts in expression. Lauren's grandmother giving me a small, approving nod, my mother watching with concern edged in curiosity, my father's gaze unreadable but fixed, unwavering. If you've ever had the satisfaction of walking into a room knowing that whatever narrative they've been spinning about you is about to get rewritten in real time, subscribe now and stay with me, because this was the moment the tide began to turn. I returned to my seat without fanfare. No grand announcement, no explanation. The driver had already pulled away, and with him, the immediate evidence of what had just happened outside. That was the beauty of it. People knew something had occurred, but the details were mine to control. And in situations like this, information isn't just power, it's leverage. Ryan waited until the band slid into another upbeat number before he crossed the floor to where I sat. He leaned down slightly, keeping his voice low enough that only I could hear. Want to tell me what that was all about? I didn't look up from my glass. Not particularly. He straightened, exhaling through his nose. Sam, he began, but stopped himself, the rest of his sentence swallowed by a long pause. When he finally spoke again, the tone had changed. You've got people wondering. Don't leave them hanging too long. Makes me nervous. I set my glass down, met his eyes, and let the corner of my mouth lift, not in a smile, but in the faintest acknowledgement that I'd heard him. Maybe you should get used to it. If you've ever wanted to let someone sit in the weight of their own curiosity until it becomes more uncomfortable for them than it ever was for you, tap that like button. You already understand the quiet satisfaction that comes with it. For the next half hour, I kept to the edges of the room, speaking briefly with guests, listening more than I talked. The less I said, the more people seemed to lean in, as if they could coax the story out of me. Tyler, of course, tried 3 different angles. Casual jokes, leading questions, even a clumsy attempt at flattery, but I let each one pass with a polite nod and a vague, non-committal answer. Then the moment came, not because I sought it, but because the evening's schedule handed it to me. The DJ announced it was time for family speeches, anyone who wanted to say something to the bride and groom before the cake cutting. Lauren's father went first, warm and heartfelt. Then her grandmother, brief but deeply touching. And then, to my surprise, Ryan looked directly at me and gestured toward the microphone. But there it was, an unspoken challenge hanging in the space between us. I rose slowly, walking to the mic with measured steps. The room felt quieter than it had been all night. I rested my hand lightly on the stand, adjusted it just enough to fit my height, and let my gaze travel across the room before I began. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, I said, my voice carrying easily in the stillness, but sometimes plans change. I let that hang for a beat, watching Ryan's jaw flex. I've been away for a lot of family moments, some by choice, most because duty called, and tonight reminded me that the life I chose means living with one foot in 2 different worlds. In one, I'm a sister, a daughter, someone who shows up for weddings and birthdays and does her best to blend in. In the other, I go when I'm called. I do what's asked of me, even when the timing isn't perfect. And I've learned that you can't always explain that to everyone. There were no interruptions, no side comments from the tables. Even Tyler was silent. But one thing I will say, I continued, is that when you've stood in both worlds long enough, you learn to value moments like this more than most people can imagine. Because they're not guaranteed. And when I walked back in here tonight, I realized that whether or not anyone here understands the details of where I just was, it doesn't change the fact that I'm here now. I paused, scanning the room. So, to my brother and to Lauren, you've built something worth showing up for. And I'm glad I could be here to see it. I stepped back, offered the mic to the DJ, and returned to my seat.
No elaborate explanation.
No details. Just enough to answer the question without truly answering it at all. If you've ever learned the art of giving people exactly enough to satisfy them while still keeping the heart of the matter to yourself, subscribe right now. That skill will serve you better than most people realize. After the speeches, the room's energy shifted again. The curiosity wasn't gone, but it had softened into something closer to respect. Even those who might never admit it directly were looking at me differently. Lauren's grandmother stopped me near the dessert table to squeeze my hand, her eyes bright. "You carry yourself well, dear," she said simply. As the evening wore on, I found myself at the bar beside Ryan. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You've always had this way of making people wonder." He took a slow sip of his drink. Guess I underestimated how much I'd feel in myself. I didn't respond immediately, letting the words settle. "You always had a way of assuming the story," I said at last. "Sometimes it's worth remembering you don't know all of it." He gave a quiet chuckle, one without the usual bite. "Fair enough." If you've ever had someone who's been your harshest critic finally take a step back and acknowledge you without qualifiers, hit like, because those moments are rare and worth remembering. The rest of the night played out without further jabs. I danced with Mom, toasted the couple, and even managed to laugh at a few of Tyler's less clumsy jokes. When it was finally time to say goodbye, Ryan pulled me into a hug. Not a quick, obligatory one, but a firm, deliberate hold that told me more than words would have. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. And for once, I believed he meant it. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars still scattered wide across the dark. The vineyard was quiet now, the last of the guests making their way to cars and shuttles. I stood for a moment before heading to my own vehicle, breathing in the stillness. There's a certain peace in knowing you don't have to prove yourself to everyone. That sometimes just showing up, steadily, consistently, and without apology, is enough to shift the narrative. And maybe that's the real victory. Not the reveal, not the dramatic moment, but the subtle change in how you're seen from that day forward. If you've followed the story to the end and felt even a flicker of recognition in it, subscribe, like, and hit the bell. Because I've got more stories where quiet moments speak louder than any headline, and I'd like you to hear them.